I'm Jim Wallace at Georgetown Center on Faith and Justice. Words are an important part of the life and witness of faith communities, and actually part of our responsibility as faith leaders. But the words of the faith community need two accountabilities, in my view. One, they must be consistent with what I would call the Word of God, with our tradition, and second, they must lead to action. So, Tracy Blackman is going to start tonight. She has overseen a statement we're releasing right now. She'll explain what it is and why us, and we'll go from there. So, let me introduce Tracy Blackman, who will tell you who she is and what this new statement is all about. Tracy, over to you.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for the privilege of being here virtually with you today. I have a question for you that I haven't asked publicly in a while, and that question is, how are the children? It's been a while since I've posed this question aloud, but it's nonetheless relevant today and always. Given the well-being of children provide a legitimate glimpse into the well-being of our communities, our cities, our nations, our world, it is prudent, my friends, to ask this question: how are the children? I began asking this question after learning of a tribe in East Africa considered to be among the warriors who are most fearsome and more intelligent than any other, the Maasai. The tribe is unique and popular due to their long preserved culture. Despite education and civilization and Western cultural influences, the Maasai people have clung to their traditional way of life, making them a symbol of Kenyan culture. So it is not surprising then to learn that the traditional greeting passed among the Maasai warriors, Kasaria Nangeri, translates to "how are the children?" And it is still the traditional greeting that they use today. This greeting acknowledges the high value that the Maasai place on children's well-being. Even warriors with no children of their own give the traditional answer, "all the children are well," meaning that peace and safety prevail. The priorities of protecting the young and the powerless are in place. That the Maasai people have not forgotten their reason for being, their proper function, and their responsibilities. All of the children are well means life is good. It means the daily struggles of existence, even among the poor and the afflicted, are seen. That the village is committed to providing proper care for those incapable of providing for themselves. So the question I invite us to as we begin this filibuster is, how are the children? How are the children since April 20th, 1999, when there was a murderous rampage at Columbine High School? How are the children since April 16, 2007, when 27 students and 5 faculty were gunned down on the campus of Virginia Tech? How are the children since December 14, 2012, when 20 first graders and 6 school employees lost their lives and their futures at Sandy Hook Elementary School? How are the children since June 17, 2015, when a 21-year-old gunman was welcomed into Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church only to take 9 lives there? How are the children since June 12, 2016, when a gunman 20 years old shot up Pulse nightclub? How are the children since October 1st, 2017, when people were attending a musical concert in Las Vegas and suddenly found themselves under fire with over 1,000 bullets dispersed, killing 60 people in that place? How are the children since October 27, 2018, when people were worshiping in a Shabbat service at Tree of Life Synagogue, and all of a sudden murder visited them there? How are the children who witnessed what happened in Buffalo at a Tops grocery store? How are the children who were in Geneva Presbyterian Church in Laguna Woods, California? How are the children who trust hospitals to be safe places and healing places, and yet now live with the horror of what happened at St. Francis in Tulsa, Oklahoma? How are the children who not only died but survived Robb Elementary School? How are the children, my friends? It is this call for community, this call for safety, this call for recognition that every child of God deserves to live, that has brought people of faith from diverse religions and doctrines together to stand in this moment to say that there are many things that we may not agree about, but we all agree on this: our children deserve the right to safety. Our children deserve the right to live. Our children deserve for their parents to be well and to be whole. Our children deserve for their neighborhoods not to be riddled with gunfire. Our children deserve to go to school and not worry that they may be shot or who they may have to help save should gunfire break out there. Our children should be able to worship and not concentrate on whether or not a stranger that enters their midst may do them harm. And not only our children that are in danger of being killed, but how are our children whose minds are being weaponized in this moment with such hatred that they find gun violence valiant? How are the children who see a nation that values guns more than it values them? For this reason, a collection of clergy, representative of over 9 million people of faith, have come together to issue a collective statement asking, begging, pleading on behalf of our children that our legislatures do the right thing and enact responsible gun control. Take assault weapons out of the hands of those who have no need for them other than violence.
So this issue of guns is not just for us a legislative issue, a political issue, it's a matter of faith. These issues are for us theological. They are spiritual, they are part of our vocation as people of faith. To protect children is an obligation of faith leaders. So I want to turn now to the Reverend Emma Jordan Simpson, who was the editor of this statement about protecting our children. Emma, turning to you to say, you were our editor, read the statement from our hearts as faith leaders. Read it and tell us who has signed this statement. Emma, over to you.
Good evening. It's my privilege to read this letter that has been birthed from the hearts of people who love God and love children and love this country. As people of faith, we believe fully that God endows every human being with both the dignity that comes with being a creation in the divine image and the responsibility to co-create a world that protects human beings from harm. We trust God above all else, including the politics and idols that surround us. Loving and trusting God means valuing and caring about the people God created, and accepting our leadership and societal responsibility to protect children's safety, their health, physical, psychological, and spiritual well-being. We recognize that the United States has more than a political problem. We also have a moral and religious problem. Our culture worships guns over God. Even before COVID-19, gun violence was the primary pandemic killing our children. In 2019, according to the Children's Defense Fund, 3,371 children and teens were killed in the U.S. by guns, enough to fill more than 168 classrooms of 20 children each. And now confronted by the horrific mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas, and each appalling shooting before and since, we name the truth that refusing to enact common sense gun control has sent a tragic message to this nation's children. We will not protect them from gun violence. As faith leaders, we grieve and we reject that message. We're called to protect all God's children. As we saw the faces of the survivors of the shooting at Robb Elementary School and heard their harrowing testimony, we were horrified and deeply moved. These children have survived a monstrous experience. An AR-15 is a killing machine, so violent that it can decapitate a human being, an adult human being. We heard the painful juxtaposition of childhood innocence and the power of military-grade weapons in the hands of civilians, in the words of one survivor, Mia Cirillo. All of my friends are dead, the 11-year-old testified to Congress, explaining how she survived only by smearing her best friend's blood over herself and pretending she was dead too. The coroner who saw the bodies of Mia's friends has said he will never, ever speak of what he saw. His statement demonstrates how the initial moments and hours of violence ripple out and become our shared, ongoing, and perpetual trauma. When a member of Congress asked Mia what she most wanted now, she simply said security. She just wanted safety. And when asked if she's afraid to go back to school, Mia quickly nodded her head yes. When asked if she thought this nightmare would happen again, she nodded again, yes. And her father teared up in the hearing when he said his daughter isn't the same playful, happy little girl anymore. What is our shared future? What is our collective now? If millions of children like Mia give up on the hope that adults will protect them from gun violence. Mia's testimony also means something else to us. We must not turn the page. We must not turn away. Other parents grieving the murders of their children should not have to wonder whether Congress will face the carnage of their loved ones and muster the courage to lead. And though these children were murdered as they enjoyed the last few days of their school year, they are not martyrs. They did not give up their lives. They were murdered. We do not need new data, new graphic images, or to hear any other voices crying out other than those we have already heard. Our children's voices and God's voice. And we must act now boldly. Our shared scriptures and wisdom traditions inspire us to protect children and to deliver safety for all children. A world that is safe for children will be a world where all can thrive. And our enduring civic good begins with centering children's needs. The Talmud, for example, proclaims, "The world is sustained only through the breath of school children." In centering children, we experience not only their joy, but also the joy of the God who delights in their questions, their songs, and their laughter. Few crimes are more harshly forbidden in our traditions than child sacrifice to the false god Moloch, whose worship consumed living children. Leviticus 18:21 says, "You shall not give any of your offspring to sacrifice them to Moloch and so profane the name of your God." Poets and writers have used the worship of Moloch to symbolize a deeply degraded culture, like the culture John Milton represented in Paradise Lost. First Moloch, horrid king, besmeared with blood of human sacrifice and parents' tears, though for the noise of drums and timbrels loud, their children's cries unheard, that passed through fire to his grim idol. Those words, besmeared with blood, and parents' tears, and children's cries unheard, are so fresh and painful right now. And as people of faith, we name the gun lobby as Moloch's henchmen. They and their killing machines have made our children sacrificial lambs in their vile and profane worship of death. We do not accept the Second Amendment as an excuse. Even the very conservative interpretation of the Second Amendment that Justice Scalia offered in District of Columbia v. Heller states that the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. Guns for hunting and sport are not false gods, and neither is responsible ownership, gun ownership, which many of our congregants support. But weapons of war do not belong in civil society. The Senate is finally moving to strengthen risk protection orders, red flags, and enhance background checks for 18 to 21-year-old gun buyers. These are important initial steps in the right direction. And in a country where there are more civilian-owned guns than people, and where gun sales skyrocket after mass shootings, our children depend on us to do more. As faith leaders, we demand common sense and widely supported universal background checks on all gun purchases, with required waiting periods and gun safety training as necessary, and extreme risk protection order laws to enable law enforcement, educators, and social and mental health workers to protect children and communities. It is entirely consistent with the Second Amendment to ban assault weapons and automatic bullet magazines for civilians when military-grade weapons serve no other useful purpose except to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Our actions must speak loudly to this nation's children. Loudly enough so that those who now mourn the loss of grandmothers and young adults killed for being Black in Buffalo, and those who still mourn fellow worshipers murdered in a Pittsburgh synagogue, a historic Black church in Charleston, and a Sikh temple in Oak Creek, they hear us and do not give up hope. Our actions must address those who lost loved ones enjoying themselves at an Orlando nightclub, those attending a concert in Las Vegas, and those killed out of the spotlight, on the streets, by abusive partners, in accidents, and by suicide. And our actions must meet grieving families and teachers in Newtown, Parkland, Uvalde, whose surviving students fear returning to school, and young Americans and teachers across the country who wonder if their school will be next. We appeal to the hearts and minds of our lawmakers. Respect the will of the majority of the American people and enact responsible gun legislation now. In the words of the Prophet Muhammad, each of you is a shepherd for your flock and will be asked concerning them, especially the children. What will you say? We know what we will say. Our moral voices, individual consciences, and sense of political responsibility compel us to demand and work for the changes required to protect children and communities. Our faith-based organizing will educate our congregations, communities, and stakeholders on where those elected to serve the will of the people stand on responsible gun legislation. Faith says enough, and this is the time to act. We offer these words from the depths of our heart, but also our determination, and we pray that you hear them. Thank you.
It's not yet. She's going to read some names. Oh, go.
I want to thank the Reverend Emma Jordan Simpson, who's the president of Auburn Seminary, for reading that statement from our hearts and from our stories in our communities and on the streets. This is an interfaith statement, an interfaith community, so I want to introduce my dear friend, Rabbi David Saperstein, who can speak to this issue of guns from his heart, but also from the heart of the Jewish community. Rabbi David Saperstein.
Thank you so much, Reverend Wallace, for your words and for your leadership all these many decades here in Washington. We gather all day today as our nation is reeling once again, this time from the escalating destruction of mass shootings in Buffalo, Uvalde, Tulsa, tragedies that have once again shattered our complacency and aroused the dormant conscience of our nation. We gather today to assure our elected officials that the American people are ready for leaders who will take on sensible gun reform. My name is Rabbi David Saperstein, and I am the Director Emeritus of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism is the largest and most diverse denomination in America, Jewry. Nearly 2 million Jews identify with the movement. For over 4 decades, I have worked for sensible and effective gun violence prevention measures, and I'm here tonight with a measure of hope that at least some progress can and will be made if our Congress has the moral and political courage to make it happen and to do it soon. With my distinguished colleagues of different religious beliefs this evening, we stand united in our response to the question, is the need for sensible gun reform a religious issue? You bet it is. As Rabbi Eric Yaffe, the former president of the Union for Reform Judaism, observed in his speech at the Million Mom March over 20 years ago, the indiscriminate distribution of guns is an offense against God and humanity. Our gun-flooded, violence-prone society has turned weapons into idols, and the appropriate religious response to idolatry is sustained moral outrage. So with my colleagues, I ask today, what manner of nation are we that in the face of overwhelming support for stronger, more effective gun safety reform, we can bring ourselves to legislate only the most anemic controls for the bloodiest problem we face. What manner of people are we that we can accept that we have lost more people to gun violence in our streets and in our homes than we have to all the wars in the history of our nation? More children every 14 months than all our brothers and sisters who perished on 9/11. And the victims of violence overwhelm our emergency rooms, require the costliest of care, erode confidence in our communal institutions, and undermine our political, educational, and civic institutions. And above all, we remember the anguish of the families and friends, the residual trauma felt by communities plagued by gun violence, the grief and heartache over loved ones stolen from our midst. Yet for over 2 decades now, we have not deviated from the path of rampant gun violence that so devastates our schools, increases the numbers of completed suicides, and brings deadly violence into every corner of American life. Our businesses, our houses of worship, our playgrounds, our homes. And it doesn't have to be that way. In 2020, over 45,000 Americans died of gun-related violence, breaking all records. By contrast, in 2019, the last year we have statistics, Japan, with 1/3 the population of the United States, had 9 deaths. It doesn't have to be this way. 28 years ago, our legislators had the moral vision and political courage to pass an assault weapons ban. It wasn't perfect, but it certainly reduced significantly, as much as 66%, the number of people who were killed with those kinds of weapons. And what does the Bible tell us of our response? Do not stand idly by the blood of our neighbor, God commands in Leviticus 19. Is that not exactly the sin that our nation has been engaged in? Watching the blood of our children spill over and over and over again. The great medieval Jewish philosopher and legal scholar Maimonides observed, anyone who can save and does not save a life, transgressors do not stand by the blood of your neighbor, and gives examples, including those who are attacked by bandits. Congress has had ample opportunity to avoid standing idly by the blood of our neighbors. Will they now rise to the test? And will they once again fail? Or finally make progress? Our legislators in the gun lobby want to blame everybody but themselves. The problem, they say, is mental illness. Well, you know the response to such claims. We certainly know the response to such claims. Congress knows the response to such claims. Tautologically, on the one hand, mass murderers are emotionally disturbed, albeit not always technically mentally ill. On the other hand, the compelling evidence testifies that the overwhelming percentage of those with mental illness are not violent, actually more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. More compellingly, in Canada and Japan, there are people with the exact same mental illnesses as here in America, but those nations don't allow an 18-year-old to legally purchase an AR-15 at his local gun store, or don't allow a 20-year-old to pick up his mother's legally obtained Bushmaster and walk into a school and randomly kill our children. Nor can they purchase high-capacity magazines that make mass murder so much easier to perpetrate. A National Public Radio piece describes the impact of an AR-15, which is a weapon used by the gunmen at Robb Elementary when it rips into the human body. Quote, "It is designed to blow targets apart. It is a weapon built for war. And when fired into an adult human body, the bullet travels with such fierce velocity that it can decapitate a person or leave a body looking quote, like a grenade went off in there, as Peter Rhee, a trauma surgeon at the University of Arizona, told Wired. The carnage the weapon leaves behind has become a signature of school shootings and other mass shootings. Our legislators and gun lobbies too often blame our violent culture and violence in the media, violent action films, gory horror movies, violent computer games, and this is a deeply troubling dynamic in American life and across the globe. Yes, there is too much violent entertainment, and for some it inures their sensitivity to violence. But in the UK and Germany, children watch the same movies. They play the exact same computer games, and they don't go out and kill people afterwards. Children in Germany, Japan, the UK, and Canada, and so many other nations across the globe with far less gun violence than ours, they're not more religious than our children. And their parents are not better parents than ours are. What distinguishes us from them is the prevalence of our guns and the reticence of our leaders to act with courage and conviction on this issue, the way that Australia, Norway, New Zealand, the UK did after a single mass killing. What a difference. As Rabbi Rick Jacobs, the current president for the Union for Reform Judaism, has said, it is not enough for elected officials to muster their thoughts and prayers when such tragedies happen. Like millions of Americans, he said, I'm sick of the pathetic excuses offered by too many lawmakers for not passing strong and effective common sense gun laws. His comment evokes the line in the Talmud, written at the time that Jesus of Nazareth lived, that debates amongst the rabbis, which is more important, study or action? Lo hamidrashi kar el hama says, study is not the essential thing. The doing is the essential thing. Which is more important? Only study is the most important when it leads to action. So we come here with one voice to challenge the dangerously mistaken belief that the forces of the status quo are too formidable and that the American people are too complacent, that our leadership is too reticent. We are here to say it is time to take assault weapons and semi-automatic weapons off our streets. We are here to say it is time for stronger, more universal background checks that really work. We're here to say we must ban high-capacity magazines. We're here to say it is time to pass Ethan's Law, mandating safe storage of firearms in residents where minors and or unauthorized persons reside. We're here to say we must close deadly loopholes like the boyfriend loophole. We're here to call on millions of parents in America's pews to demand action to protect their children. We're here to ask America's clergy to raise up this issue from their pulpits, beginning this weekend until Congress passes legislation, to send their sermons to their members of Congress, to their congregants, to the local media, and to mobilize our congregants to flood Congress with the demand to act now. We are here today, as we will be here in the future, for one reason above all, that the children of Uvalde, the worshipers at Mother Emanuel and Tree of Life in the Sikh temple, the countless more victims of gun violence everywhere will not be forgotten, and that hope and some good may yet come from these tragedies. For the parents mourning children who will never come home again, for the children mourning parents who will never hold them again, for the grieving families and friends who will never hear their loved ones' laughter again, for those who suffer grief, injury, or trauma in the public eye or in anonymity, we see you. We are with you. Your pain is our pain. We will speak for you and for those that were lost. As Rabbi Jonah Pesner, the current director of the Religious Action, prayed recently, may God forgive our country for loving guns more than children. Let us so act today as to ensure that no faith leader, advocate, parent, teacher, or student should have to make a speech like this again. Let this be the last righteous outcry of grief over young children who are shot and killed at school. Let this be the last time an American president must comfort grieving communities due to such violence. And let the world see an America united in our sacred obligation to protect all God's children. And to that, let us say, Amen.
Rabbi David Saperstein said it very well. Study is good. Study the data, the facts of all the killing. Study it. If our study doesn't lead to action, what good is our study? We have a filibuster. It's about words, talking 24/7. Words are good too, but unless our words lead to action, what good are our words? So I am very pleased to introduce right now the Reverend Adam Russell Taylor, President of Sojourners, which publishes words, good words, all the time, but mobilizes people, publishing and mobilizing. It's a network, it's a movement of calling people to act on their faith. So it's time for action, so please listen to Reverend Adam Russell Taylor, the President of Sojourners.
Thank you, Reverend Jim Wallace, for that kind introduction. I am grateful to be able to stand in solidarity with so many faith leaders from across traditions, across this entire country, that have signed on to this critical and powerful and timely statement that I believe can help be a game changer in ending gun violence in this country. Sojourners is an ecumenical Christian organization that has been committed for 50 years to help inspire Christians of all walks of life to put their faith into action for social justice and peace. And in this particularly painful moment, I cannot think of a more important and pressing issue that needs our action right now. 4 days. That's how long researchers at Princeton University have found that people's sadness and outrage lasts after every major gun massacre in America. 4 fleeting days dishonors the lives that are stolen. 4 fleeting days isn't nearly enough time to break the political impasse and overcome the extreme stranglehold that gun lobbyists have on our politics, particularly on the GOP. As the days have passed since the horror in Uvalde and Buffalo and Tulsa, the killing has not stopped. According to the Gun Violence Archive, just over the 3-day Memorial Weekend, roughly a month ago, there were 15 mass shootings. Now, not all of them grabbed the headlines, not all of them were even known by the majority of Americans. We have had 233 mass shootings since the beginning of the year and counting. And let me share with you another statistic that I believe not only breaks my heart, but breaks the very heart of God. The leading cause of death, as you've heard, for children and teenagers is guns, with more of our young ones killed annually than all soldiers and police officers combined. An obsession with guns has become a form of idolatry in our politics and in many parts of the church. And I want to speak in particular from my Christian faith tradition to Christian leaders all across this country. We must wrestle with these unconscionable statistics, both as a political failure, but also as an extreme spiritual failure. In the face of the epidemic of gun violence, people of faith must do 3 things. First, we must debunk the lies and mistruths that so often suffocate efforts to pass sensible gun reform. When pundits argue that gun rights are sacred and an unconstrained constitutional right, we must remind them that even conservative leaders like former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia said this: like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever, and for whatever purpose. When politicians lie about the ability of background checks and stricter age requirements to prevent mass shootings, we must flood their phone lines with evidence that these policies can and do save lives. When radio hosts spread fear that gun reform advocates want to eliminate the Second Amendment and take away all people's guns, we must inform them that sensible gun safety laws would still enable responsible adults to own guns for hunting or for their personal safety. And when anyone dares to say that there isn't popular support for sensible gun reform, we need to say loudly and clearly that public opinion is squarely and overwhelmingly on our side. According to a recent political poll, 88% of the general public supports universal background checks. 80% supports age requirements of 21 to purchase a gun. And 67% support banning assault-style weapons, the same weapons that were used to cut down the lives of children and of adults in Buffalo and Uvalde. We must replace the spiritual lie, but it's not just about politics. We must also unmask a series of spiritual lies that so often undergird our addiction to guns and fuel public inaction. We must replace the spiritual lie that the right to bear arms somehow supersedes the right to life itself, with the biblical truth that every child and every person is made in the very image and likeness of God, and that every single life is sacred and worth protecting. We must replace the spiritual lie that the best way to restrain evil is for more people to be armed with weapons that inflict death, with Jesus' presumption of nonviolence. Jesus argued that those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Second, as people of faith, we must preach and teach and engage in courageous dialogue about gun violence and its root causes, even if this is uncomfortable or divisive in our congregations. Clergy and faith leaders in particular need to be unambiguously in support of sensible gun reform and evidence-based and holistic solutions so that we can address the root causes of our gun crisis. And third, we must sustain political pressure and elevate gun control to the top of our political priorities. I'm grateful for the bipartisan work that over 20 senators are engaged in right now, led by Senator Murphy and Senator Cornyn. And it is absolutely imperative that they accomplish as much as possible before the August recess and before the midterm elections. But let's be crystal clear. What is on the table right now represents a set of modest reforms that can only be the bare minimum of what is necessary in the immediate moment that we're in. We must get these wins and follow them with bold and decisive action to pass stricter background checks, to reinstate a ban on assault weapons, to raise the minimum age to 21 to purchase guns, and so much more. And as we do these things, then we can also pray. I believe in the power of prayer to both change hearts and minds and to move mountains of injustice. But as we know and as we've heard, simply offering thoughts and prayers in the wake of each horrific massacre of gun violence has become an empty ritual, as long as those prayers repeatedly fail to lead to sustained and bold action. I'm reminded of the words of the prophet Isaiah, who criticized those who practice shallow forms of worship that don't lead to a commitment to address the root causes of injustice. Isaiah proclaims, "Is this not what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the kind of fasting that I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke?" So let us ensure that our thoughts and prayers lead to sustained and bold action. I'll close with this. After witnessing the utter and experiencing the utter anguish and grief and heartbreak after Buffalo and then Uvalde, I started to be filled with a sense of resignation and of cynicism that we would just be in another time loop of momentary outrage that quickly dissipated and ended in no measurable policy change. But then I started to reflect on the book of Hebrews. I reflected on that great cloud of witnesses that has come before us and continues to cheer us on as we continue to put our faith into action for justice. The author says that they don't have time to list out all of these names, to tell the story of Gideon and Barak and of Samson, of David and Samuel, and all the prophets who through their faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised to them, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned into strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Well, this moment reminds me, and this passage inspires me, that we must write a new story for America, a story in which, by our faith, we conquer the despair and cynicism that so often surrounds this issue. That by faith, we help to push through legislation to pass bold gun reform that keeps our schools safe and our communities protected. That by faith, we overcome the stranglehold of the powerful gun lobby. That by faith, we turn outrage into ongoing action. And that by faith, we become a powerful, incontrovertible force for saving countless of lives in our midst, particularly of our children. We can do this and so much more by faith. Let's do it together. Amen.
By faith. By faith. By faith. This isn't just another issue, another topic. This one has to come from the heart of communities of faith. And I think there's nobody I would want to introduce you to more than the Reverend Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, who speaks from the heart of the black churches. The black churches can tell you all kinds of stories. Not just mass shootings every so often, but killings every single day that the media pays no attention to. On the streets, in our lives, in the lives of black churches. So let me introduce you to speak from the heart of the black churches, the Reverend Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner.
Thank you, Jim. It's really my pleasure to stand with brothers and sisters in faith on this night when our hearts are broken by all of the lives that have been lost. But let me speak tonight also, not just as a faith leader, but as a gun owner, as a responsible gun owner for over 27 years. What we're facing right now is far too many families are going through trauma that they don't have to go through from unrepentant, irresponsible, radical, in many cases, racist gun owners, people who glorify guns, glorify the killing. One might say that the guns don't have eyes to measure somebody's skin, or they don't know of a zip code. They don't even choose the victims. It is people who decide that, the mindset of people. So I'm happy tonight to join my faith colleagues in saying to members of Congress, enough is enough. How much is a life worth? An AR-15 costs on average $800. How much is a human life worth? How much is it worth to have children, parents, take their children to school only to have them reported later in a body bag? How much is a life worth? Or for grandmothers, or churchgoers, or people out having entertainment, to be doing what people do every day, doing life, and not to have that gun take their lives. I say right now that the idolatry of gun must end, and the lie that AR-15 ownership restricts gun owners' rights. It does not take an AR-15 to kill a rabbit or a deer. And as one who had a farm, I know that for a fact. What we're saying tonight to America is that remember the story about the 11-year-old girl who smeared the classmate's blood, who had died with her blood just to stay alive. How much is that child's life worth? Tonight we ought to thank Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney for her great work in sponsoring H.R. 6717, the Preventing Pretrial Gun Purchase Act, to ensure that background check system used for firearm purchases deny a firearm to a person, prohibit from possessing guns by lawful court order, and governing pre-trial arrests. These are some steps, but they're hardly enough. I think that we ought to think about it this way. How much is it worth to have America trembling in fear, which is what is happening right now? I know as an African American faith leader, we hear all too often, day and night, from African Americans fearing now whether they should be going to the store, knowing that the police are not going to show up in time necessarily for them not to be a statistic. I say tonight, members of Congress, get over the captivity to the gun lobbies, and think about what would it feel like if it was reported that your own child had been killed, your own grandmother shot, or someone you know, someone you love, someone you care about, mowed down. We need semi-automatic weapons off the streets, period. The issue for us right now is what kind of nation are we? What kind of faith do we stand behind that say guns and religion go together? No, they do not. Guns do not go with religion. Life goes with religion. Care for others goes with religion. Care for our neighbor goes with religion. Care for the least of these goes with religion. The rest of it is really up to us. Members of Congress, get a backbone, because that's what will save our nation right now. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Jesus said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me. Forbid them not," he said, "for such is the kingdom of God." Now, this famous text comes at a moment when Jesus, the rabbi that's drawing all the attention from people, they all want to be around him, they all want to talk to him, and all these kids are running around, and they were interested too, and the people kept the kids away from this important man. And he said, no, let the kids come. Let the kids come. Forbid them not, let them come. I want to talk to them. And the last line of this is the most important. For such is the kingdom of heaven. The kids, little kids, for these, this is the kingdom of heaven. All your other talk is all the other talk. It's the kids. We don't have that straight yet. Finally, what happens to our kids and protecting our kids and our kids thriving and feeling safe and feeling secure, that's key to the thriving and safety of our whole society. They're the measure. The kids must become the measure, and they're not right now. They're not the measure of politics. The gun lobbies, the money, the base. The kids aren't the measure. Jesus says, yeah, they're the measure. For of such is the kingdom of heaven. That's what he said. Now let me tell you a personal story. On Uvalde Tuesday, let's call it Uvalde Tuesday. On that Tuesday, I was in a meeting, really important meeting, with nation's political leaders about Buffalo. We're talking about Buffalo. How you got shot in the grocery store for being black in Buffalo. And we're all gathered there in a very famous place with famous leaders talking about Buffalo. We decided what we should do and next steps. And just as we're walking out of the room, our phones go crazy. Something has happened. On my way home, I saw my phone. Something had happened in Uvalde, Texas, a place I knew nothing about. And all night long, I read the news, and in the morning, my phone apps, all my news apps on my phone, these faces kept appearing on my news apps. Every news app had a different kid whose face was on one, and the kid had just been killed, 19 kids killed. And I lost my composure seeing the faces of the kids. I lost my composure. And I haven't gotten it back yet. And I want to suggest we not get our composure back from the faces of those kids. We got to keep losing our composure until we decide the kids are important, because so many of our children are suffering from the Jesus text, those dead and wounded by recent shootings, those who've lost their friends, who watched their friends being shot and killed. Watched it happen. Not just killed, but you've heard the stories from the coroners. They needed DNA samples from parents or tennis shoes to figure out who the kids were. Emmett Till's mother made a tough decision a long time ago to show how her son, her black son, had been mutilated by the Klan. That's a tough thing for parents to do, but we need to imagine what happened to these kids. They were blown away, they were destroyed, their bodies were mutilated, decapitated, it says, these kids. Let's not get over our composure, okay? And now the kids are afraid. Listen to the kids. Listen, talk to your own kids. Kids are afraid all over the country, everywhere, because they're afraid they're going to be next. And this 11-year-old Maya Cirillo, we keep lifting her up. Well, she's the one that got to me testifying to Congress how she smeared blood all over herself from her best friend because she thought the shooter might come back. And when they asked her if she feels safe going back to school, she said no, nodded her head, no. Do you think it'll happen again? Yes, yes. What do you want, they said, members of Congress. What do you want? She said, security, safety. I want safety. And the line in our statement that's most important to me, that haunts me, is this one. What is our shared future? What is our collective now if millions of children like Maya give up on the hope that adults will protect them from gun violence? Kids are giving up on us. They're certainly giving up on politicians. And maybe they're giving up on all of us who regain our composure after the 4 days that Adam talked about. Kids are giving up on us as going to protect them. They have the right to expect that. All our scriptures say protecting God's children is part of who we are. The kids are giving up on our commitment to protect them. You heard the stats. Every year now, guns are the leading cause of death for children and teenagers. It's time to be honest. Jesus also said, he said that telling the truth is important. I will bring the truth, and the truth will set you free. That's what he said. So it's time to be honest. This isn't This is a moral theology. You've heard all that, but this is political. This is political. And I'm going to tell the truth here, and I don't know about all the nonpartisan, bipartisan stuff going on. I'll just say one political party is using a false and extreme interpretation of the Second Amendment as an excuse to virtually ignore the slaughter of our children. That's the truth. There's a recent poll that says 44%, I was stunned by this, but it's in the poll. 44% of Republicans now believe that mass shootings like the kind we saw in Uvalde that took 19 students' lives are, quote, unfortunately something we have to accept in a free society. People of faith will not accept that definition of freedom. We will not accept it. We will stand up and speak out against that to protect God's children. As others have said, even the best legal minds say the Second Amendment was never supposed to be unlimited. Come on. And while this framework in the Senate is indeed a beginning step in the right direction, but it's not nearly enough to protect our kids. Our statement says we appeal to the hearts and minds of our lawmakers, respect the will of the majority of the American people, and enact responsible gun legislation now. Well, okay, I want to say this. If our lawmakers won't listen to the moral words of faith leaders, or to clear public opinion, overwhelming on behalf of much broader and deeper gun safety laws, many of us in the faith community will mobilize to make sure this impacts the only thing that they really care about, which is their reelection. They may not care about our moral words and language and theology and Bible, but they sure care about reelection. So we're going to make this an issue for their reelection. We'll make gun safety a single moral issue on which to vote in the midterm elections. Yes, the ones coming up in just a few months. We'll make gun safety an issue to vote on. Maybe they'll care about our words when we make their reelection the issue about gun safety. I mean, the facts are clear. After mass shootings in the United Kingdom and Australia, get this straight now, conservative governments in all those places, conservative governments passed strict gun safety laws, including banning assault weapons. Conservative governments in Australia, Scotland, they passed those laws to ban assault weapons, and the mass shootings stopped. They stopped. That's a fact. Until that happens in America, our children will be subject to slaughter. And they'll know that we don't care about them enough to protect them. Let me say it again. Until we ban assault weapons on our streets in the hands of 18-year-olds whose brains aren't even fully developed yet, until we ban assault weapons, our kids have reason to conclude we don't care about them. It really is as simple as that. Opposition to assault military weapons in a civil society must be made into a matter of faith and a critical election issue for people of faith. I so respect and love and admire the work of all the parents who've lost their kids and the survivors, and they've worked so hard for so long, have gotten nothing from the federal government. Some progress on local issues and states, but nothing from the federal government. So now, maybe they'll get something. Maybe a few more background checks for 18 to 21-year-olds. Maybe red flag laws. some of that may help a little, but until we ban assault weapons, our kids have the right to conclude we don't care about them. That's their right to conclude we don't care about them until we ban these weapons. They're just made to kill people and kill them fast. That's got to be a faith issue, and it's got to be a political issue. It's time to speak out, and more importantly, to act. So I love the filibuster, I love the words, but as you've heard, words aren't enough. In our tradition, the words have to be accountable to what our scriptures say and to action. Suffer the little children. Forbid them not. Let them come unto me. For of such, of them, is the kingdom of heaven. Our children have suffered enough. It's time to stop it. Amen.